Have you ever made a choice? Maybe you bought something totally on impulse or reacted poorly in a high-stakes meeting or.
Panic sold a stock.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. You panic sold a stock, and then later you look back and just wonder, why on earth did I do that?
Right.
If you are nodding your head right now, you are certainly not alone. Today, we are framing this deep dive around a startling and, frankly, a somewhat humbling truth.
Highly humbling.
Truly, most of our choices, even the ones we are absolutely convinced we are making with pure rational logic, are actually being controlled by hidden mental biases.
It is a massive reality check,
Yeah.
honestly. We have this profound desire to view ourselves as incredible rational beings.
Right.
We picture ourselves sitting at the control board of our minds, objectively weighing the pros and cons of every single situation.
Yeah.
But the source material we are pulling apart today completely dismantles that comforting illusion.
It really does.
We are looking at a comprehensive review of the audiobook version of Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. He's a Nobel Prize-winning behavioral economist, and this work essentially redefined our entire understanding of human decision-making.
Which brings us to our mission for you, the listener. The actual audiobook for Thinking Fast and Slow clocks in at roughly 20 hours long.
It is a beast.
A total beast. It is notoriously dense, heavily academic, and packed with decades of complex scientific research. You likely do not have 20 spare hours this week to sit through an academic text. So we are going to decode how the human mind really works.
Exactly.
We'll explore these psychological shortcuts that trick us every single day and pull out the exact tools you need to become a better thinker, investor, and decision maker without all that heavy lifting. Consider this your cheat code for understanding everyday behavior.
I love that. A cheat code is an apt way to look at it, because what we are exploring isn't simply a list of silly mistakes humans make.
No, not at all.
It is an exploration into the underlying evolutionary architecture of the mind. We are going to look at exactly how we think, and more importantly, why our brains are fundamentally biologically wired to operate this way.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core concept of Kahneman's work, the absolute foundation that everything else we will discuss rests upon, is that the human brain operates using two entirely different modes of thinking.
Right, the two systems.
The book labels them System 1 and System 2. Let's look at System 1 first. This is basically your brain's autopilot.
System 1 is fast thinking. It is entirely automatic, highly emotional, deeply intuitive, and it specializes in making remarkably quick judgments without you even realizing it is happening.
Like completely under the radar.
Completely. Think about the last time you were in a crowded room and instantly recognized a friend's face across the sea of people.
Yeah.
You didn't consciously analyze the distance between their eyes or the shape of their jaw. You just instantly knew it was them. That is System 1.
It is the same system firing when you read simple words on a billboard as you drive down the highway. Or when you instinctively slam on your brakes to avoid a pothole before you even consciously register what the hazard is.
Exactly.
It is also the system responsible for forming those lightning-fast first impressions of people we meet. It happens in milliseconds.
Which means System 1 is incredibly useful for keeping us alive and functioning. It works effortlessly. It allows us to navigate a wildly complex world without being paralyzed by analyzing every tiny detail.
But there is a catch.
A big one. Because it operates at such a breakneck speed and because it relies so heavily on emotion and intuition rather than logic, it is highly prone to making mistakes. It jumps to conclusions, it makes sweeping generalizations based on very limited data.
So if System 1 is the fast, slightly reckless autopilot, that brings us to the manual override System 2.
Right.
System 1 is fast thinking, System 2 is slow thinking. It is logical, analytical, deliberate, and most crucially, it requires a massive amount of physical and mental effort to engage.
You can physically feel System 2 working. You use it when you sit down to solve a complex math problem or when you are meticulously planning out a multi-step project.
Or carefully analyzing and comparing different investment options.
Yes. You have to actively summon System 2 to do the heavy lifting. It does not turn on by itself.
What's fascinating here is the biological catch to all of this. Because if System 2 is so much more accurate and logical, why aren't we just using it all the time? Why do we let the reckless autopilot drive?
Because analyzing complex decisions requires massive amounts of energy. Our brains are biological organs, and from an evolutionary standpoint, they're incredibly greedy.
Right, they burn a lot of fuel.
Exactly. The brain makes up only about 2% of our body weight, but it consumes roughly 20% of our resting energy. Evolution has trained our bodies to conserve energy at all costs just to survive. Therefore, our brains are inherently lazy.
They actively want to avoid burning precious calories on deep, System 2 thought.
Precisely. So to save that energy, the brain simply defaults to System 1, leaving it to quietly run the show most of the time, using mental shortcuts. In behavioral economics, these shortcuts are called heuristics.
Heuristics, basically rules of thumb.
Yes, rules of thumb the brain uses to bypass complex processing. Now, while these heuristics help us make rapid decisions so we don't freeze up in the grocery aisle trying to calculate the optimal nutritional value of every cereal box, they lead to systematic, predictable errors.
And when a shortcut consistently leads us to the wrong conclusion, it becomes a glitch.
A glitch in our operating system. And these glitches are what we call cognitive biases.
So if my System 2 is essentially asleep at the wheel to save calories, how exactly is System 1 tricking me? What is a trap I am probably falling into right now?
A perfect place to start is the anchoring effect. This occurs when a person relies far too heavily on the very first piece of information they see when making a decision.
Oh, I see this in retail all the time.
All the time. Imagine you walk into a store. You see a product on a mannequin, and there is a massive sign next to it that says it originally costs 5,000 rupees. But right below that, in bright red lettering, is a tag showing a discounted price of 2,500 rupees.
My brain immediately screams that I am getting an incredible 50% off steal. I feel like I am making money by buying it.
But what if that product's real value is much lower? What if it only cost a fraction of that to manufacture, and the store never actually intended to sell it for 5,000 rupees in the first place?
Right, it's a completely artificial number.
But your System 2 did not step in to calculate the objective value of the materials or the labor. Your System 1 just grabbed onto that very first number it saw, the 5,000 rupee anchor, and used it as the sole baseline for reality. Because 2,500 is less than 5,000, System 1 determines it is a fantastic deal.
It completely skews perception. The brain is not calculating value, it is just grabbing a lifeline to make a quick decision so it can move on.
Exactly. Another pervasive glitch is availability bias. This happens when we judge the likelihood of an event based purely on how easily examples of that event come to mind.
Wait, so we confuse memory availability with actual probability.
That is exactly it. We confuse the vividness of a memory with the actual probability of an event happening in the real world.
Like the airplane example from the source text.
Yes. If you watch the evening news and see intense dramatic footage of an airplane crash, your System 1 thinking immediately concludes that flying is highly dangerous, simply because that fiery image is sitting right at the front of your brain.
Even though, statistically speaking, flying is incredibly safe.
Exactly. But System 1 does not understand statistics. System 1 evolved to pay attention to vivid emotional threats. Today, our media feeds us vivid threats constantly, and System 1 reacts to all of them.
Then we have confirmation bias.
Yes, this is the human tendency to naturally prefer and actively seek out information that validates what we already believe to be true, while entirely ignoring information that contradicts us.
The classic diet example from the review highlights this perfectly.
It does. Let's say a person becomes utterly convinced that a specific, highly restrictive diet works. Because of confirmation bias, they will selectively filter reality. They will only notice the success stories.
They will find the one person who got great results and highlight it as absolute proof.
And they will completely ignore all the failures.
It is basically the brain taking the path of least resistance again. If I admit the diet is a sham, System 2 would have to do the painful, calorie-burning work of admitting I was wrong and reevaluating my worldview.
System 1 just says, look at this one success story, we are totally right, and saves the energy. This naturally leads us into how emotional we get when real stakes are on the line, particularly regarding money and risk.
Loss aversion.
Yes. A massive portion of Kahneman's work is dedicated to loss aversion. This is the biological reality that humans fear losses significantly more than they value equivalent gains.
The exact metric highlighted in our sources really paints the picture. The psychological pain you feel from losing 100 rupees is scientifically far more intense than the joy you feel from gaining 100 rupees.
The emotional asymmetry is huge. If we connect this to human evolution, it makes perfect sense. For our ancestors, gaining extra food meant you were comfortably full. Losing your only food meant you starved to death.
Survival meant prioritizing the avoidance of loss above all else.
And the real-world fallout of this is massive today. It causes investors to systematically avoid necessary risks because the fear of losing capital overrides the mathematical logic of potential compound growth.
People will stubbornly hold on to bad investments simply because selling them makes the loss real.
And on a corporate level, businesses will fear necessary change just to avoid the potential pain of losing their current market share.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Kahneman built upon this concept of loss aversion to formulate his most famous contribution to economics, prospect theory. To truly grasp how irrational we are, let's present you, the listener, with the exact dilemma laid out in the research. You have two choices. Choice A is a guaranteed 500 rupees. I just hand you the cash.
Okay.
Choice B is a gamble. You have a 50% chance to win 1,000 rupees, but a 50% chance to win absolutely nothing.
Now, mathematically, the expected value of both choices is exactly the same.
Exactly. If I took that choice B gamble over and over, the math averages out to 500 rupees anyway.
A perfectly rational System 2 computer would view choice A and choice B as completely equal. But the research reveals that most people will immediately choose choice A, the guaranteed 500 rupees.
Why is that?
Because humans base decisions on perceived gains and losses from our current reference point. We crave certainty over risk. The psychological terror of potentially taking the gamble and walking away with nothing pushes our System 1 to grab the guaranteed safe outcome.
We are biologically wired to protect what we are guaranteed to get over taking a mathematically sound risk.
Precisely. Now, these biases do not just affect our wallets. They fundamentally warp how we view the past and the future. Kahneman calls this our illusion of understanding, which brings in the concept of hindsight bias.
Oh, the "I knew that would happen" syndrome. We hear someone say this all the time after an event occurs, even though they never actually predicted it beforehand.
Once an event happens, our brains quickly rewrite our own memories. We connect the dots backward to make it seem like the outcome was entirely inevitable. We selectively remember the clues that pointed to the outcome and forget all the evidence that pointed away from it.
But if hindsight bias ruins our objective view of the past, the planning fallacy absolutely wrecks our view of the future. I am horribly guilty of this one.
We all are.
If I think a big project is going to take 3 months, it almost always ends up taking 6 months or more. Why am I always wrong?
Because of our consistent inability to estimate time. When we plan, we stubbornly imagine only best-case scenarios instead of realistic ones. Your System 1 visualizes the optimal path to success and fails to account for the realistic friction of everyday life.
We plan for a perfect world that simply does not exist. So what does this all mean? We have explored these fast and slow systems, the mental glitches, the fear of losing, and our terrible grasp of time. How does all of this come together for you, listening right now?
Well, the source material stresses that this isn't just academic theory. Entire global industries rely on these exact principles to function.
Marketing departments rely on the anchoring effect. The finance industry wrestles with prospect theory and loss aversion. Politicians heavily leverage availability bias to drive votes.
Understanding these hidden mechanisms is your armor. It is how you pause, recognize that your autopilot is making a flawed assumption, and force your System 2 to engage. It helps you make better everyday judgments and avoid manipulation.
Before we wrap, we need to talk about the actual listening experience of this audiobook. Our source review gives a very honest rundown.
The ratings are quite telling.
They are. The book pulls in a stellar 4.6 out of 5 overall rating. It earns a perfect 5 stars for content depth and another 5 stars for scientific value. It is packed with deep scientific research and real-life psychological experiments.
But there are caveats we have to provide. It is a massive, roughly 20-hour listen. It is heavily academic and requires deep concentration.
Right. If you decide to tackle this audiobook, you must listen slowly. You have to actively pause and reflect on the ideas. It is not a breezy storytelling book you can just passively absorb. It demands your System 2 thinking.
Which is wonderfully ironic. A book about how lazy our brains are requires you to fight your brain's laziness to get through it.
It really does. So just to briefly recap, we are operating with 2 systems. Our intuition is heavily flawed by biases like anchoring and loss aversion, and our brains constantly trick us to save energy.
The ultimate takeaway from Kahneman's work is awareness. For you, the learner, recognizing these mental traps is the very first step to bypassing them.
You are no longer just reacting to the world on autopilot. This raises an important question, though, and it is something we want to leave you to mull over on your own.
Yes, a final provocative thought that builds on Kahneman's work.
If our brains are biologically wired to rely on System 1's flawed shortcuts just to save energy, how many of your most deeply held, unshakable beliefs are actually just your brain taking the path of least resistance?
It forces you to ask whether you reasoned your way into a belief or if your brain just accepted it because it was easy.
Keep questioning your own mind. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.